Recently, the President of the United States called the border between Canada and the United States an artificially drawn line. Ironic, as in my opinion, that is what I consider an artificial drawn line, right there. But that line was not random. It was shaped by war, protected by resistance, and confirmed through treaties that both countries agreed to. Now, I don't expect the President of the United States to understand history, so guess we'll give him grace on that. To understand why the border matters, we have to go back to the War of 1812. Canada was not an official country. The land north of the United States was made up of British colonies, including Upper Canada and Lower Canada. But the people living there were already building communities that were separate from the United States. In 1812, the United States declared war on Britain. There were several reasons. Britain was interfering with American trade during its war with France. The British Navy was also stopping American ships and forcing some sailors to serve on British ships. But some American leaders also saw an opportunity. They believed they might be able to invade British North America and add the territory to the United States. They thought it would be easy. It certainly was not. American troops invaded British North America several times. They were fought by British soldiers, local militia, French-speaking residents, and indigenous nations. The role of indigenous nations was extremely important. Leaders such as Tecumseh fought because American expansion was threatening indigenous lands and independence. Indigenous fighters helped stop several American attacks, but they paid a terrible price. Tecumseh was killed, his alliance was weakened, and the treaty that ended the war did little to protect indigenous territory. So this was not simply a story of Canada defeating the United States. It was a story of different groups resisting American expansion for different reasons. Both sides won important battles. British forces captured Washington and burned government buildings, including the White House, after American troops had burned York, which is now in Toronto. But neither side was able to conquer and permanently control the other's territory. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent in 1814. The treaty returned captured land and restored the border to where it had been before the war. That meant the United States did not gain the Northern Territory that some Americans had hoped to take. But the War of 1812 did not create the entire modern border by itself. Part of the eastern border had already been established in 1783 when Britain recognized the independence of the United States. After the war, Britain and the United States continued negotiating the sections that were still unclear. In 1817, the Rush-Bagot Agreement reduced the number of military ships in the Great Lakes. Then in 1818, both countries agreed that a large part of the border would follow the 49th parallel, from the Lake of the Woods to the Rocky Mountains. Later treaties settled on other disputed areas, including parts of Maine and the Pacific Northwest. So people in Maine and California, I'm sorry, at one point I think you might have belonged to Canada. So yes, people drew the border, but people draw every border. The American border with Mexico was drawn by people. State borders were drawn by people. And let's be honest, they enjoy the artificial borders when they gerrymander. The United States itself was shaped by wars, land purchases, treaties, and negotiations. Calling a border artificial does not make it meaningless. The Canada-US border represents a place where American expansion stopped. It represents agreements made between governments, and it allowed Canada and the United States to grow into two different countries. Canada officially became a country in 1867, but that might not have happened in the same way if the American invasions had succeeded. So when the president talks about removing an artificially drawn line and making Canada the 51st state, he's not just talking about a mark on a map. He is dismissing more than 200 years of history and the independence of another country. That border exists because expansion was resisted. It still exists because both countries agreed to respect it. Canada is not an unfinished piece of the United States. We became a separate country because people fought, negotiated, and sacrificed to make that possible. The border is not just an artificial line. It is the line America agreed not to cross.